Thì có cuốn sách là nhập Bồ Tát Hạnh á, chapter số 9, chương số 9 á.
Quyển sách dày là trang 315, câu kệ số 90. Quyển sách dày 315, câu kệ số 90.
Dạ, cái cuốn sách này nè, trang số 315 mà câu kệ số 90. Ai có cuốn sách này thì 315, câu kệ số 90. Đa số đều có cuốn sách này hết.
Không, quyển sách màu vàng này nè là trang 295, câu kệ 90. Quyển sách này là 295, còn quyển dày là 315.
Tất cả mọi người đều có cuốn sách dày, ít ai có cuốn mỏng, thành ra có ít lắm. Cái cuốn sách mỏng mỏng có ít người có lắm. Đa số là có cuốn sách dày.
295, câu kệ 90.
Nếu mà cái cuốn sách mỏng thì 295. Còn cuốn sách dày thì 315. Cũng đều là câu kệ số 90 hết. Sarah, can you give her English? You don't have? Oh, you brought your English book?
Yeah, but she doesn't know what page.
Chapter 9, verse number. Pardon me?
Verse number?
90. 90, yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, should be the same.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Ai cần cuốn sách tiếng Anh thì ở đây có cuốn sách tiếng Anh.
This one. What's over? Oh yeah, that's it. Oh, they are comes to tree cable to go about your best. They attend the issue no let. Didn't nearby that is something. Near got jiggle number lot and draw. Two days something you get your the bush house in the torture and you're going to Yambulemba. Near young age and yam later that Tadu Kaja Tishin Capital law. Oh, she's so better. Garaju Tanda Neve, the Haget and Jorvachu somewhere, Milady somewhere. The 10 days, Delos, Churchubala, Delo. The 20 summer Jordags, Danjority Melusera. Oh, the 10 days. You see no loss. Tadamara the top the Milady, you sing in Dorbu. You sing in Dorbu Sena. When the sun yet in the see that in the should have Tezolia and it. Because the tree chair and Chaba period at the direction and can say all the shard. So at them now. And it said the don't have you to be used on it. Said the Sagu Namela Sobakaga, Babama to be used. Oh, Tendem Bob Julia was, Bumdama Buchi in answer. Take Quebecaris said the Sagu Namela Soba message the care let us Robert Chirimato. Sure, there's someone else to George him. There's only Majivich a lot of me go on some chair to the way of my racer. The Marazum Tanjo Militaria, George him a pencil to the way you are the 10 day, Marazu to the million day, and then you sing in Novo, Bumda Bambule Labare, so good. Sona.
Đức Songkhapa.
So here, as the great Jela Tsongkhapa has said, this life of leisure is more precious than a wish-granting jewel. That I have found such an existence is only this once, so hard to find, yet like a flash of lightning is easy to vanish. Contemplating this situation, it's vital to realize that all mundane pursuits are like the empty grain husks floating in the winds, and that we must extract the essence of human existence. I, a yogi, have practiced in this manner. You, who aspire for liberation, too, should do likewise. So right now, what we have in this kind of human life, with all of the sorts of freedoms and endowments, is something that is really more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. It's said that if you had a wish-fulfilling jewel, that you were to like put it up and make offerings to it, it would spontaneously accomplish all of the desired aims of this life, remove our illnesses and give us wealth and so forth. But the kind of life that we have right now in this human rebirth is even more precious than hundreds of thousands of those wish-fulfilling jewels. Because although a wish-fulfilling jewel can sort of give us a few of the things that we might want for this life, it can do nothing to benefit us beyond this life. The Dharma, the kind of practice of the Dharma that we do on the basis of this human rebirth that we have right now, we have the ability to accomplish our benefit into many future lifetimes. So while a wish-fulfilling jewel might seem like something that can grant us whatever we might want, it has no ability to bring us Buddhahood, it has no ability to bring us liberation, or even any benefit in our future lives. So here, as this verse says, our life is more precious, more valuable than even a wish-fulfilling jewel, in that we have the ability on this basis to accomplish the happiness not just of this life, but many lives in the future.
Kewati pe bezo chene tanda yoya kaburi tiora. O te didanye ba tare tamshi. Talen tamchi re ma to che namji mangsha te nge son la soba tindele ke che te yore sora. O tare lenji ngar kewa soba chi tule tene lenji nyeba de. Tare tamchi re ma to tu takbari se maho bana tinde yasu yasu tobya yoba. tende le la bebu tende mari da sungora ya teach suna.
And this kind of life that we have right now is something that is, as it says, just this once. We have this kind of life of leisure and endowment, but we shouldn't think that it is something that remains forever, but rather we should recognize that most of the time our natural tendency is to accomplish non-virtuous actions. It takes us a great deal of effort to accomplish virtue, whereas we don't have to make any effort or think about it. We sort of spontaneously do negative actions, which means that really we are creating the causes and have been born most of the time in the lower realms.
Jigle lawre, yegan jigle lawate, namge law nashes. Namgala law chukba de chida nyude, the chude ragging nagipa jidugra, yegan jigla namge law tandrase. Oh, take into carsoda. Chin the something jigden chawakose. Tende tenis social military case butende samlutane. Send the chikbuge. Tandale to sigora. C'è di cibo segue nemmeno sovati, ogni cibo tanda lega c'è songora. Oh, cosa. Io kan giula namgel tana. C'è di samshese. Jiden chawa kus. Bimba chawa sto doja. Jiden ji chawa konde chenga zo lega c'è le tapsi c'è ne penjo yo ne karche na ko. C'è di tam gi tanda ne te sha c'è no era mato c'è ko nyabdo kisen ro ke o marwa. Bimba chawa sto doja nes. Bimba sitting on the Duro Chia Charina, Pagwata Tiniga Yunani Achana, Pagwa del Hagbeki, Nini Budama Ledera. Then the Maris, Chen de Chibut on the Chete, Pagwaya Chartavanas, Nimbu Leke Omar, Chen de Yamdo Sordo, Lagbeki Durmado, Chima Ledres, Chima Penjal Pensi or Marisoda. Bimba Chawash in the Tokyo Ness. Nizengundo Nimbu Lebaco stayed, Nizengundo. Sende chibu tonda maimba kyo chima penje ya tonda tuye ki yurumburwa kyo chima se sende da ko sheda yurum ke marwa o ti ndu kaso bimba shwa shindu to chune nyeje gundo nyibule bakos o kadu yina meke ya chote pa ke chote le nyeje gundo bezu chene kima ro melu to ba de tonda demba kyo chima penje ke tonda chitu gudo yesungudo ya tis.
So we shouldn't assume that we are going to get this kind of a human life again and again, given the ways that we act. And as it says, so hard to find, yet like a flash of lightning, it is easy to vanish. This life that we have right now is something which is extremely difficult to come upon because of the causes that we have to accumulate. And it is something that is like a flash of lightning. A flash of lightning appears for a moment and is gone after that. It is something that naturally disintegrates. And so, too, our life, by thinking about how valuable and how precious it is, as it says in the next line, contemplating this situation, it's vital to realize that all mundane pursuits are like the empty grain husks floating in the winds, and that we must extract the essence of human existence. So, this life that we have right now, we should use it for something meaningful, not just pursuing the affairs of this life, getting food and clothing and a good reputation, and so forth. Our worldly activities are things that we are going to have to leave behind. No matter how much we accumulate in this life, we have to set all of that aside. And other than the karmic actions that we have created, we carry nothing with us. So our worldly activities are kind of like the husks of grain, right? When you have the grain together with the husk and you are winnowing it, the husk is blown off in the wind. It's insignificant. It's not the essence of that grain. And so we shouldn't get carried away with those kinds of things that are like the husk of the grain, that are going to be blown away by the winds, that we aren't able to take into our next life. We won't carry any of that with us, but rather it is our actions that we have accumulated that will carry on. And so right now, while we have this kind of situation, we shouldn't just think about the affairs of this life. It isn't really a very long time that we have, but our future lives are much longer, so we should work to make preparations.
뭐야? 어때 다 이제 군도 니불레바 거였어도 니무 가르래 거랬으나 남녀 말아서 기부 총어 등 첨부 수출이잖아. 르버레지 숨 체제 속이라. 개체쇼제데 최대 제리야 개와 상부질 하다미 최주베 땡 해버리지 톱내야 미럽야 하네하리야 제데 야르야르도니야 뇌 탑시쳐오래서 이 멤버즈 양양자 니마 용서들마 남주대서 망쳐대서들마 녀와이다 던들어서 마 달로체는 로체는 마디레서 거라 어디 이제 다 님부 껴치마 당부들야 껴치마 하다 녀와이다 던들마 집세 하다 미 껴와서 나고요라 나라도 동주도 시도도 소보다 셈니데 가가도라 마도 가사 매차 말해 가셔야 동대자는 땅가 매가 저기 삼겨라 닥쳐있긴 집어서라 땅가 매가 차도도 삼자 집어요거라 다 매가 차 집어요 말해 다다 소보니든 저와체기와라 셈다 르니든 저와체세 셈 르되게 셈게 땡체마도세 아니 셈데 세대 나와도 누구 매 신의 셈코라 참세제 르기 로버드 제토요 말아 댄스도자 그 삼르타야도 야 내게 시주디 제토요 말아 대도 가서라 진이 가가도 마도 매버 차 말해 지금 원에도 가르치고 그랬으니까 매버 저기 삼지고 말 매버 차고 말해 당가 르다 섬이 가가도는 겨워신다서 누구여 삼고라 다들 야구질로 여 삼제 뒤값들이 아니 삼로 개초게 삼로 다 미겨 아빠 나르제 개발 치수이라 저 개회 삼로 돈에 도토치고 알아 어디 돈달다 교가르서 하고 그랬으나 담보데 미겨와 주바 개와 주주에 들어 야 가서라 나도 지나 여기 와 그 근데 교내 수좀 내셔매서 먼저 하다미 개와 톱제기 교대 가르스네 미개와 주방배 수좀 되래서라 먼저 교내 수좀 내 샬라 차와봐야 미개와 주대고는 샬라 차와봐야 샬라 패버트야 띵가라도 남지 칸에 깨져 셰드 로아 안에 섬지 삼을 단데 뢰지 쩨바치드 지소단 루드 어디도 용거라 미소 쩨바다 부세바다 섬지 세바치드 용거라 마침발레바스 미 게르게다 게르다 집어 배조라 요 탑시시라 소저마저 로임사로 지소날이야 지게기 주다 팀바 소소카스레 차사께버 텐데드마도 미션다 사사냠도 야발르디체 탑시시 드레시 마디라 저마저 로임세 아니 계시시 수수다 추주시다 근데 뭐다 대처바 매가 셔셔 빵거라 소치 빵바 소치 빵에 빵바 뭐 제가 내가 가만히 나 그거는 참아 지금 맞겠어요 되네시 이거네 납세 다시 참아 되게 또 그냥 가르쳐 있잖아. 근데 내 손에 깨지게 요 영화 예수 믿고 내 미기 왔지도 봐. 디샬 사와지고다 사와들에. 영화 예수 거내 미기 왔지는 샬 내고라 샬 사와지고라 사와도 봐봐. 된도 저 소껴발라 소베 개와도 저거라. 템버마와라 소바. 어디 건도 하다 밀리지 줄와. 뒤쪽으로서 와라. 님부 당불해야 되지라. 되지 소나 야.
So here, then, recognizing the great value of this life that we have right now, it says day and night, continuously, we should try to take its essence or make it meaningful. And in terms of the kind of meaning that we can take, the essence that we take, we could say there are three levels of this: small, medium, and large. So here, if we are to, in our future life, fall into the lower realms, we have no opportunity to continue to practice. So at the very least, we need to make sure that we don't fall into the lower realms, that we secure a good rebirth as a human or a god. And so there is, at the time of death, a kind of fear that can arise. Some people have this fear fear like, I'm going to become non-existent. I'm just going to be sort of cut off. My self will be lost. But at the time of death, we don't really need to fear the non-existence of the self or becoming non-existent, but rather death is a process by which we are separated from that life force. The body is no longer able to act as a support for the mind. And so therefore, they are going to separate. We are going to have to take another rebirth. And that rebirth is determined by the kind of virtues and non-virtues that we have done. So rather than fearing becoming non-existent, we really need to fear sort of falling into the lower realms, being at a place where we are no longer able to continue to practice. And so really our main emphasis, at least at the lowest level of taking the essence of this life, is to think about virtue and to avoid non-virtue. What causes do we need to accumulate and what do we need to avoid? And so as it is said, the cause for upper rebirths or for happier migrations is nothing other than ethical conduct. And really this means abandoning the 10 non-virtues, abandoning harmful actions and engaging in actions that are beneficial to others, which really comes down to the way that we comport ourselves, the way that we interact with others in our day-to-day life. When we think, when we speak, when we use our body, are we engaging in things like taking life or in stealing or in sexual misconduct where we create disharmony in couples? Are we engaging in lies or things like that? And so we need to know what the non-virtues are, those actions that are harmful to others, and make every effort to avoid them with our body, speech, and mind, to not act in ways that are harmful to others, but instead use our body, speech, and mind to be of benefit, to protect life, to speak truthfully, to have a kind of loving attitude toward others. So when we talk about taking the essence of this life or really making it meaningful, at the first stage, what is really indispensable is ensuring that we have a good rebirth. And such a good rebirth is dependent upon the actions that we engage in our day-to-day activities. So watching and knowing that we are avoiding the 10 non-virtues, those things that are harmful to others, and engaging in things that are beneficial, speaking truthfully, protecting life, this is really the foundation of taking the essence of this very meaningful rebirth that we have right now.
Thì chúng ta có ác tâm, có hại tâm, có tà kiến. Ngược lại những điều đó thì chúng ta từ bỏ 10 cái ác nghiệp thuộc về thân, miệng, ý, và chúng ta thực hiện những cái điều lành. Có nghĩa chúng ta không phóng sinh, không có sát sinh, từ bỏ sát sinh, còn phóng sinh, không có nói dối mà phải nói lời chân thật, không có ác tâm và có cái tâm muốn làm lợi ích cho chúng sinh. Đó là những cái điều kiện để chúng ta sinh được vào cõi lành, cõi cao.
Ôi à, tôi đâu thì kêu cho mà là đam mê của bạn tôi nghe xong là mấy cái chơi chơi cái cái chơi qua mình kêu chơi thì bạn kêu chơi thì tôi biết rồi, sáng là sáu bạn phải bắt tôi biết rồi. Thì ngày nào tôi chỉ cho nên tôi chơi trang sức chơi mà rồi, chơi sáng này chơi con tôi chơi mà rồi. Thì ngồi này chơi sẽ thì chỉ cho nên là xem là ta được cái chơi thì là chơi用过了。xem là ta đang làm gì cái chơi đó chơi bắt tên đó xem cái xong là ta đang chơi này nên cái vào mình cái vào sao cái đó thế là tên này tôi cho số nghe số mà cái đó mình cái số đó cái vào sao số này ya là đam mê thì ya được cái đó thì ngay cho sang mà thì ta cái sẽ thì mấy bài chơi này ăn đồ sạch gì bên nào sẽ cái đó thì mà đi ra và thì bé cái chuyện vậy sáng là cháu bằng mà phải bắt được anh ấy thì số năng mình có số cái đó 소소 나오면 계속 심지어로 봐. 대완들 동해면 되고 짜로 봐. 소소 나옵니다. 아니 년제다. 아니 남주 저 여기 지소나도서 소소 소바르서 내가 지금에 되나다. 뒤도 레버시고 와라. 기도자 메레 내가 맞아 저 맞아서 미기 뭐 마서서 태다나다 태마다는 내가 지 맞게서 참고지 아버지도나 소소 기부 대보. 니 지소대 대보 나오면 기부 용거라. 어딜 쳐서기 와라. 말하면서 되게 나다당 말아 대체 말을 삼겨라. 심제도 가는 가지고 집어를 가지고 두어진대로 건조 개심부 말을 삼고도. 그 산제다 심제니 개시 좀 집어에서 거를 비잖아. 산제가 남대 전에 가지고 야를 땅 거를 심제는 가지고 문에를 나래다는 가지고 야를 거라. 자 심제리한테 바다도 심제 교보를 알아 야가 요를 마 두가 요를 가가 요를 던도 요를 그래서 그 같이 콘서트 그 안에 두고 섬기도 코로나 두고 이나야 소소의 면에 콜을 잡아다 저와방면에 소소리야 라다 메다야 공부 다르바다 탐지 켜버려 가게 들렸더니 오고도 심장에 저와방 배버전에 라다 밀리기고도 이래 차단반에 심장에 이래 차단게 차단반에 다르바 통고도 기분 정기더라 동해를 때도 타러 기치 재매고 봐 소소 라와요게 다르바 통고 대 심장을 때니 오고도 산제지 고반 토스데 다베 셴제 바세라 다가 저 통마메반에 삼로탄다 코라 노르샤 삼방아라 개치시치 셴게 셴조제니 라게 ton달 셴을 차와체 티제 노르샤 땅에 라레 셴게 쇼체 다다 셴게 삼로 코라 제부장이 있어라 기부 첨불내 주자 통마메반에 라 개치시치 바첩들이야 그 노르샤 되게 껴시지 준 다들 개치슈지니 가게려면 말. 다 셴게 치슈지 거래샤. 라이야와도 거래샤. 다다 셴게 삼르니디 제부자고도 다셴 제스거라. 토마메바네 라 개치슈지게 디마치세 다 셴게 치슈지게 시거라. 토마메바네 셴야와도 아나시 라데 셴게 돈달에 걸게 시거라. 셴게 돈다 셴데 랑게 돈다 예세. 셴게 돈다 셴데 칼레 코나데 드레 요마르 가시 토시베토네 드레 셴오 틸리시 와라 딜데 심제 개침부인 뭐 지소날 대대사 쳐들랩 거면 대가도 삼로 보고도 와 남녀 곰 잡치셔서 저주고 셈 곰세라 동반이 곰세라 사 곰세라 곰겨라 이 곰에대 샤리아 페바 두베다 서와파에 심제 돈다 두에서도 곰겨라 저지 지와라 로좀 되어라 당에 데데 삼탕 샬 차파고레 케와투레 잠바 공고레 니지 데데스 공고레 동반이 두스 공고레 자주심 두스 공고레 삼탕게라 단 루드 잠페 레가 문에 쳐라 마미 롭초테나 시라 기게 롭초테네 티니 내지스도 티네시 삼탕게라 삼탕에서 지존나 leptil레고라 어디치 손이야 다 만다스 티티티 손네데라
So, here, if in our future life we want to be born as a human or a god, we need to create the causes for that. We need to accumulate the causes in order to take such a rebirth. And that really comes in our practice of Dharma. And some of us might think that the practice of Dharma is like just sitting on a cushion. But really, when we are going out in society and acting with relation to others, that's the real practice of Dharma. So when we go out, if we think, oh, I'm a practitioner, but then we engage in things like lying, we get angry and so forth, that is where we are creating the causes for taking a lower rebirth or alternatively taking a higher rebirth. And so that's really the real practice of Dharma, even though it might not appear to us as such. But avoiding harm and doing as much as we can to benefit others is really where the rubber meets the road. This is where our practice is. We begin with our family, our friends, those that we work with, and so forth. And if we are able to relate to them with more love and compassion, to avoid harming them and so forth, then we ourselves will be happier, and those around us will be happier. So here, at the very lowest level, it is important for us to recognize that the practice of ethical conduct, particularly our actions, are extremely important. And our actions are done in relation to others. Often we hold up like, oh, the Buddha is so important, but we look down upon sentient beings. We criticize them. We say, oh, look at all those faults that they have. But really, although the Buddha teaches us this path, we practice it in relation to other sentient beings. We have to work with this, work with them and our relationships. How do we relate to them with our body, speech, and mind? And in order to gain a good rebirth in the future, we depend upon other sentient beings. The virtuous actions that we create in relation to them is what leads us to that. And it is, too, in relation to other sentient beings that we are able to achieve liberation. By getting rid of our attachment and hatred for others, we can ourselves gain a state of liberation. And when we come to the point of the great path, where we see that really cherishing others more than ourselves is the path to the highest kind of happiness. We need to learn to see others as more important because since beginningless time, we have been driven by our self-cherishing, of seeing ourselves as most important. And look at, it hasn't gotten us anywhere. And so we need to learn to exchange that in the same way that we normally disregard others and only work for our own aims. We need to exchange that such that we are able to disregard ourselves and only work for the benefit of others, which is actually what will bring us genuine happiness. And so here, Dharma is about how we relate to others. We think like, oh, I'm going to do some Dharma, I'm going to meditate on bodhicitta and emptiness and love and compassion and all of these various topics. Well, that's really our training for the actual practice of Dharma, right? Which is going out into the world and relating with others. So it's like the way in which a soldier would train for war. You know, they engage in training exercises. The kind of work that we do meditating on various topics is so that we, when we go out and are in society, are able to relate to others in a virtuous way.
지솔 거야 내가 지금 알아 부불 따고 있는다 가르치고 있는다 장마 쓰고 있는다 지솔 팽개 와라 지솔 팽벨 내가 지도 진짜 개와래 저 지솔 팽개 요 삼제 삼바 삼보 제제제나 네 양당배 초아시도 어떨라 총 접촉을 내가 가르네 접촉을 총 접나 밀리안 거고 셀레 내보다 유주 제제 야자에 저보다 세트에다 들려지는 말이라 럭스세라 소접초에 캡사코라 사회 최초에 디고 사초요라 또 롱베테마 제바다 주마스티라 레테에다 야자에도 세등위다 루자에도 소령 고고다에 소야다 라 아니 텔레제트리가 별레데 두다도 순제히라 되소야 고고다시 밀레 소소 캡사요야 된다 침대 틈바시 메시케네 텔레 양당베 소아시도 땡에 들어 야부제 내가 이네티 야부제 하서 남다시 내가 집에 있어 밀팽기리 치솔 거에 내가 지금 어라 삼네 대처래 양당베 소아제거래 달라자들래 내가 대 탑자세 다코 거리네 탑자 제샤고서 야부 마지나 로초래 로베초아 초아 상속도 대조 밀을 토야 나를 지들을 초아 상부들을 메시게에 상부체게에 대처를 되어라 어디 인정하라도 시솔 거에 내가 시지 지어라 산계에 자주 선바sol을 납전난 것도 소리발에 장고래서 지다 소시나 미고고 간토래 지소 고고 간토래 남가 소시나 쪽세 소시나 신거답시나 밀로 거에 시지라 미강에서 시지라 강에서의 돈달이야. 텔레펜도 시대가 되게 장수도 리베네가를 장수 때로 소리벌 장매를 장수 소리벌 장은 미치도 거고 간토래서 매도서 장게이나 뒤마이베 쇼하다 근데 매스 탄다 소보 탄다 지텔 패토 그래서 근데 계제세 자도도 자나 근데 메꾸바쳐 말아 계제 강가 시에도라 아니 대제를 봐서 대 주세 삼을 따는 시험바치스 주세도서야 다시게 세제 상문 연구와 말다세 소소 상문다제 다다 주세할 텐데 야다 버는데 말해서 소소게 남쪽에 제심바치 있어도 미치 랍제 상문 때문에 소유와 말아 근데 나들을 보이네 또 소소 심비티에 때로와 근데 대중한테 철 교회가 접시적으로 내가 진남지 메시고라 뒤돈다를 깨요래 뒤에 철을 줄통나네 철 랍제 제도가 네 자체로 진짜 심제 탐제해야 되는 거라 당분남이다 냠도 땡게 수치네 자체로 바로절야 대완돌라 동해면데 심제 임바삼제 콜야 차와방거 콜 펜바 쪽으로서 롱하게 지게 차요라 대강에 소비어 말아 깔레레서 단단가서 하트 심제 탐제스다 파샤 밑에 저가 두실 로바치메도 삼기라 단다 간줄 깔래요라 너 장장선에 깔래 매차래 가래 돈에베 가와 초래나 니께바 장매 마물 심제 대두고세 삼로 코트웨 그래요 말아 버루치려 왔던데 용구라 야 뒤질랍나 됐어 너만 좋지
So, we have been born as a human, and there are certain things that we need to do to be able to support ourselves, to sustain ourselves. And so, some of us will work as doctors, or as teachers, or as laborers, as cleaners, watching children, and so forth. There are various needs within society, and so we do various kinds of work. But really, what is important is the kind of attitude that we have in doing that work. If we think about these things that provide for the needs of people within society, this is important. These are things that benefit others, whether we are watching children, or we are a doctor, or we are a cleaner. These are all necessities. And if we undertake such a livelihood with the right attitude, thinking, may this be of benefit to others, then that itself becomes the practice of right livelihood. That becomes a practice of Dharma through our doing what we would need to do anyway to make enough to support ourselves and to provide for the needs of society. And so here, if we engage in a way where we are just trying to get as much profit as we can for ourselves, like we try to cheat others, whether we are doing like some kind of shady dealings with others, or like if we're selling something, like say we're selling grain and we just sort of push a little bit off so that we get a little bit of extra profit, then we are acting in ways that are not only illegal, but they are wrong livelihood. And so if we have this attitude of just wanting to get as much for ourselves, that is not the kind of attitude that we should have. But if we live our lives, if we engage in a livelihood with this kind of attitude that we should follow the law, that we should be doing so in a way that benefits others, then really we can make our work a practice of Dharma. These are things that are necessary for society. As it is often, the Buddha himself has said that we should learn the various arts and sciences. We need these kinds of people doing this sort of work in order to be able to have society. Like, for example, we need roads, we need furniture, we need someone who is farming, we need those beings who are doctors who help us avoid untimely death and keep ourselves healthy and so forth. We need people who are able to teach language. I mean, having language allows us to know what we're doing, to express ourselves and so forth. We need logic and reasoning. By others learning that, we learn to use our own intellect to evaluate information and not just say, oh, this is true, just whatever is put out there, but have the kind of ability to scrutinize that, to say, oh, is this right or is this wrong? That's something that is beneficial, not just for this life, but can be for future lives as well. And so we need to be able to support ourselves in this life. We are going to have a livelihood, a means of taking care of ourselves, but we can do so in a way in which, if we have an altruistic kind of attitude in which we say, you know what, I'm doing this for the benefit of all sentient beings, we can develop our mind more and more until we naturally feel this desire to be of benefit to all sentient beings. We no longer have the kind of difficulty in doing that.
Oh, tene ya nyawa da tandu kaba ne kya langara rala rawa meba pumbun dole chene mida lada lame ko de khora pa asgar ngara to le da nyum be shawan de chune pumbun dole che sobu da me da la te do da me da nyone do te wara te so da khoa ba asgar kya thoma meba ne ga zo kya sangbo ya sangshu sama lai ngo kya jin sangba to zo che Sambu kache na tende che manyuge kya la manyuge yo mare pe yabu la re tuba na ne tunge ki pe che me banyage tunge di nyong manyu se yo me tunge kanga nyawa yeta tanduta tunge kare nya kanga nya de ra ta ti nya je tanda tu stage yo mare sugara tare ku gabres ta je tha che fa ra pe tunge de nyong mu go che tarbe chola tamje kembe cholia do ye tapsi che ore ta da ba do Kya tende la sosu ke sheshe kyudane tanda ke tuwa chima do ya cha cha yo me doas ta samlo kora chibu kyaus kyurchu tas kyu sambu de ral pembe kyudi tu neve kyudi pa ti che ore sugara 어디에 단단가도 대주 밀려지 진짜 제통계가 밀려 짜친 붙이래 디 톨라 마다서 다 솔라다나 방보를 해서 거라 야 뒤질라네 되네
So here we have since beginningless time cycled in samsara. We have taken rebirth as human beings. We have taken rebirth in the hells as a preta or hungry ghost, as animals and gods and so forth. And so here, those of us who uncontrollably take rebirth due to the force of karma and the afflictions, this is we take up and cast off our aggregates. Those of us who do this are samsaric beings. And we have really cycled from the very peaks, from being a being like Brahma, all the way to experiencing the worst sufferings in the hells. We have experienced it all. And really, the kind of attitude that has driven us is this self-grasping and self-cherishing. And we should have this attitude, I'm going to change this. I'm going to sort of alter the way that I have been thinking up until now in order to change the course of things, in order to decisively pursue liberation. And so this life of leisure and endowment that I have right now, I am going to use it for that purpose. I'm going to try to change my attitude and really work to eliminate harming others and try to benefit them as much as I can in order to change this pattern of uncontrolled rebirth within samsara.
Cái thân người quý hiếm này, một cái thân người tốt lành như thế này, thì chúng ta sẽ đánh mất đi cái cơ hội. Thật là một cái điều đáng tiếc.
다 소소 가서라 단다 가리래가 저기다 어디서 봐 개월에 줄이야 남짓때 송도 소소 삼로다 소소 삼로 코르도나 삼로 가리 땅도 소소래 따도 저라 소바 저라 삼로 야고 땅도 어디가 삼로 야고 도자든데 삼로 코서나 밀는데 왔지 아 야고 메도스 먹어 봐샤오라 그냥 삼로 롱마대 야보면 도보면 다서 세미에 대다 다들 돌아라서야 삼대 소소 계획적으로 삼로 따야도 로저 제도 가르 뒤쳐래 그거야라 소소소소야 따도 저거라 소소 셈 가르 삼고도 예제가 가르치기도 카네케지 가르치기도 뒤따기 나니 야로야 셈이 삼로 따다 야로 카네케지 셰다이네도 밀치바치다 코도이네도 촌야라 내 맘바체 콘도사사 콘도세나니 서바치자 최선의 맛을 팬다요 말아 최세대 뒤도 고요하다 어디인데 단당 알아도 매체대 빼 개체 무시부치를 속도 아테인데 뒤 톨라다기와 말해서 뒤 방부 톨라스나 하구나 단당 매버 수주와 말해서 방부 아 떠나가지고 대샤라지 동작하셔지 경라스나 아버 당한테 맞서서 로 방부 쇼치라 근데 방부치를 소소 메시자 전부터 톨라다는 겨와 침에 판지 단다 럽 전부 쇼부 두교를 대마도 다가 샤샤데 방심지에요 말해서라 방심요 말해 그야 어떤 메시지인데 저 토벌에 따라 빼야고 그가 야고 중앙에서 가와 침부 쇼부지 공거를 저는데 가와제요 말해 딜레 빼서라 또 와서는 랑간에 라나 캡사라 라스나 가다라 쳐대라 소소 메시지와 상부 텐데지 톱 가리는 전통게 senze jibu tanda marwa, senze kari chene majene saye tonye tesa chandi bachi kohara bata tele la uji kidu eni chayo marwa, tida kugurwa. O ti indu kasore, meche de tsa chimbu yinbache, ti tanda meba taas tola tana, nitinbe tikba mikiyo chola chene pe pangbu re. Kawa, kewe solo meba taas yu chene pangbu rwa, ti tsa chimbu yinbache shimba chene, eni kasore. Susu tanda milu toba de, tenshembu shibuji tubendo sam susu lega che to ngone cheni chanju samba chadu ata tadi ngechi lamne ngaje orna se labda tide yore chi yore ko dwa su yone ne ko ta lega shanda ra yo lobjo ya go yore chida lega shanda ra yore ina ko tanga lega karche de tanga kengo tange chi chere ye chanju samba lega chi ni chere chanju samba lega ngone ro samlutana 다 kengo tato mege tuzu tato chene chanju simbe lega chigora. Chanju simbe se kengo tange le yore, shinge tabge na le yore, soda chege na le yore da. Chanju simbe se de kombre chep kyangya mara da. Oti di tina shi. Garanzo lega chete ati, kewa lap chenpo chilpa kyure shenpe samlara. Di chene metse koran diya buche mao bali ya metse di gansu tanda sim chungbu samla tang tungge langdor shenge tunjin zomge tinda jikab tile metse di chola batang che rachi bu tunda mayimba ngodo lada mii koba toba che tine rimbe kewa kyu di tarwa toba che kongzho dang, nga jie dang, chao do dang, ren sun dang, nyamo tosu ganga pa pa ya che ra. Tine ya tile tse tondo ne rang le shen chi ba Dagwe shen chi be chanju samba se sangye gyungo ne de ra chanju samba. Tinde sangye je goba je toba chagi yin sam simje tamje ge ya nirin meba to truk tumge ge deba yosu sobe kone to truk tumge ge kye ku se yende kunde je sangye je yuwa chagi yin sam. Tanda yurgu yoma de tapsi chen ya yura chagi yin sam. Te chi do nge sangye goba tumje ge chu to su nye toba che samlo ta nyane yang de nyamsu lagi te chi do chu shu yu sam chu nyenge yin sam kulo se ta ne se ba shu ya te de.
So here, whatever you do as work, it's important to think about how you approach that in terms of your attitude. We need to watch ourselves, watch our own thoughts. What is our motivation behind engaging in that work? Is it something to is it something positive and altruistic, or is our motivation something negative? I mean, we need to be aware of what is happening in our mind. If it is something virtuous, we should rejoice. We should try to increase that. If it's something non-virtuous, we need to try to avert that, to stop it. If we have just kind of a neutral mind, we need to try to move that toward being virtuous. So here, it's not as though like we can just allow our afflictions to come up as they'd like, and then we sort of say, oh yeah, I need to do the Dharma, I need to try to be patient. But based upon recognizing how valuable this life is, we don't want to let it go to waste. We need to work with our mind. We need to constantly be watching, what am I doing with my body, speech, and mind? If we think about it, like this life is so incredibly valuable, but we don't necessarily recognize it as such. Like if we were to say lose $1,000 or a couple $1,000 somehow got wasted or lost, we would feel like, oh, what a loss, that's so terrible. We feel this sense of remorse, like how could I have lost that? But we don't have that same sense of loss when we waste our time, when we waste this life that is something incredibly much more valuable than some amount of money. And so here we have in this life something that is so precious, and we need to recognize it as such. Thus we will take our time and use it for things that are positive. So we have the ability to do something much sort of greater than just, feeding and clothing ourselves for a life. We have something that is it allows us on this basis to secure happiness well into the future, to be able to achieve liberation or the state of Buddhahood. So here there was someone that I knew at the school in Varanasi that was wanted to do something that they thought would be like actual work as a bodhisattva, and they thought, I'm going to go watch the elderly, like taking care of the elderly. That's real bodhisattva work. But when we think about it, whatever work we do that is beneficial, that is necessary for society, if we undertake it with this attitude, may this be of benefit to sentient beings, and we try to increase and sort of expand that attitude, then that really is a bodhisattva kind of a work. We should work on looking at every single sentient being as wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, and really make that virtue expand out. So while we are here, we have this opportunity to, through abandoning harming others and benefiting them as much as we can, secure a good rebirth as a human or a god, or even beyond that. If we work to eliminate all of our afflictions, our anger and our attachment and our jealousy and our hatred, our pride and so forth, getting rid of all of those afflictions leads to a state of liberation. And even beyond that, when we recognize the value of other sentient beings, we have on this basis, on this body, the ability to give rise to this attitude of bodhicitta, wherein we can think, I am going to become a Buddha. I'm going to become one who has eliminated eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities, and it is able to fully benefit all sentient beings without any kind of distinction of some being close and some being distant. And so here, when we are listening to these teachings, we should undertake it with an attitude of thinking, I am going to listen to this in order to put it into practice, in order to actualize these teachings and develop the kinds of qualities that will lead me to that state of Buddhahood in which I am able to be of benefit to all sentient beings without any sense of partiality towards some and or hatred toward others. And rather, we should generate this kind of motivation for listening to the teachings, and not just that we are going to listen, but that we are going to take that and put it into practice in our day-to-day life.
Phẩm hạnh cao thượng để đạt được vào vị Phật. Mà hiện tại chúng ta chưa có phẩm chất của một vị Phật, nhưng mà chúng ta sẽ nguyện được trong tương lai. Cho nên với cái động cơ mà trong tương lai con sẽ xem tất cả chúng sinh không có sự khác biệt giữa thân và sơ. Con phát tâm Bồ Đề, phát tâm để loại bỏ tất cả những phiền não tham sân si ghen tị kiêu ngạo để đạt được giải thoát, để vì lợi ích tất cả chúng sinh. Với cái động cơ đó, chúng ta học bài pháp ngày hôm nay.
Shenja Kugumena, Yatiko Gandhi Samutagora, Lumizawa Serva, Shenja Dogu Yunarva, oh, Lumizawa, Lu Junka Samutana, Lutil Chabatin Dodura, or Tia Kansa de Luntayoma, Tia de Yota Yoguda, Kashe, then Shuma Vunalia, Shunzomba Body, Kiba in Bechan, Pemegi Lula, Chabe, the Pemegi Lusoda, Telia, and Nekasura. Juan Chue, Lu, Juan Kanga, Mizan, some time shake door. T-shirt, the Pemel Lula, Marathon, said, Tinda Yongdoa, Timare, the Bessa Corana, Sayora. Kiba ina, Pemel Lula, Charging Dogo Yuna, Shenja Chembuche, Kanga Yuna, Telecatana, Shenja Chondura. The Peme in a Kiba Lula, Tinashita shows, Pejana Soyora. The Zomba body, Kiba in Bechane, Pemel, Shenja Chasatis on the teacher, Sayora. The Peme in a answer to Kibel to some tower, Matia, or Tia Hako, some Jumabuyonge, Tendamara, Tida. Lil Tambani Shas, or Lil Sidan Tambani Shas, Nature can get all the cats and Bore, can Santa Shagdoa, Ya Casura, Tamba Langa, Droyata, Lobson Cheata, Tezo Tamale, Tambani Shagodoa, Tambasha. Tunda Kariso was Samlotaya Shirab Gitaksha Chen and Shirab Gitahako Titola, Tambasha, Tisaware, Tambanya Shabas. You are the Lobson chairs in Tare. Lobson Terrain attended the Lobson Chi, take all the Lobson Chibi, then the Tower some Latanja, the Shirab Gitache. I think I did Tanga Titangi teacher with some trade and the Lobson Yawa would think I don't some to go. There's a load and there's a Koran told some China Tada. Now some Shanda said, and the quote that day I was a say with Chato Medoa. Tikadu in at our Santa Labudua, Motor Tanga in and Motor Tanga Kablia, Tanga Motor Tanga some Tanda. Oh, and it's Kai May membership, which is tired to China. Goloche Yomara. And now made a chair and it's China Goloche Buddha. Combatia de Tarisha, as you can go into Tadahakuda. Tanga Combatia, some substitute Samna, that is some Shanda Habitation and reroute to the Kagayakudua. Zako. Lega Karichivina Titolia, Trembatian Shana, Lega the Tada Uchetura, the Trembani Shase. Chita can get all the Trembani Shasha, Mitabatole Trembani Shayore, Roa, the Kanga Comja Kangada. Lega chair, the Lobson chair that Tametole, Shirab Gitaksha, Lega chair, the little in some, and take until the same day, change the Tegoda. The Madame Shanda, take the Table, 내가 논주요 같은데 용거라 뒤에 가서라 르잠바니 샤스 근데 초아 잠바니 샤스 초라 대화 동에 가라 그 초아 잠바니 샤스 근데 셈 잠바니 샤스라 근데 최 잠바니 샤스 근데 망부여라 당부 가지고 지단 세대사 르메자와 고메라 소바라 근데 초아 대화다 동에서 봐 주르제 동해지라 시체도 봐 주야다 근데 고메 내가 셈미다 봐 셈데 깨지 그 준도리네 준디 때부터 되게와라 뒤때도 깨와 치마 줘야 돼 가가 요라 영토고 요래 셈데 그 조다 깨지 줄고야 돼그 준디 되게와라 신이 반도네 셈준 참을 셔도 되게와라 어디 셈미다 와서라 아니 최 그네 영무 저지 셔대 랑자 가서 돌자 남자서 계획체디 랑자 어떤데 상을까요? 진짜 잡아니 샤시야 용구도 야 뒤지소나.
So here, as for the Dharma that we are talking about, in general, we are in Shantideva's guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, and in particular, the 9th chapter. And within the 9th chapter, this section which deals with the 4 close placements of mindfulness. So here, this begins with mindfulness of the body. And when we talk about this is often sort of contemplating the way in which the body is unclean, right? When we are really clinging to something as being very desirable, in order to get rid of that sort of clinging and attachment, we think about the uncleanliness of that body. Now, here we need to be careful that we're not talking about the person themselves, right? We're talking about the body. And most of the authors of these great texts were male, and so therefore the object of their attachment was largely female. So often the descriptions in these texts deal specifically with the female body, and some have taken this to be a sort of criticism of females' bodies or a dislike of women and so forth. But looking in the texts themselves, we can see that this is not the case, that the author says, well, if you are a woman and men are the object of your attachment, then you should switch to that. So this is mindfulness here is employed these days everywhere. Really, when we talk about, in particular, the longer phrase is the close placement of mindfulness. And mindfulness really involves this idea of using wisdom to have a particular understanding and then hold that in mind, keep the mind right on that. So here we can establish for ourselves that whatever kind of work we're doing, if we are able to have the kind of wisdom of understanding and then hold that with mindfulness, we are going to be much more successful. And so this is something that generally in society that now is being advocated for in all kinds of different sectors, the importance of learning and employing mindfulness. Like even when we're driving, we should be thinking, okay, right now I'm driving, and keep our sort of mind focused on that particular topic. For example, myself, I am getting older, and so old people probably have the same experience that when you are, say, walking, you need to really be paying attention to your walking. I'm making this step, I'm making that step. If you lose your mindfulness, you may well start falling down. And so here, when we have this kind of faculty of mindfulness, we are much more successful in our work, whatever it is that we might be doing. And we can have mindfulness of all of these kinds of different topics. We can have mindfulness of impermanence, a mindfulness of any sort of topic, like these 4 close placements of mindfulness. But it is basically this idea to have an understanding of something and keep the mind right there. So here, in terms of the 4 close placements of mindfulness, or the 4 applications of mindfulness, again, it begins with the body, thinking about the body and how it is unclean and so forth. And then we have the mindfulness of feelings, the recognizing that our happiness, our sadness, or sort of suffering, and our neutral feelings, these are changeable. They aren't permanent. They aren't intrinsic or inherent to us, but they come, they go. So that's the mindfulness of feelings. And then we get to the mindfulness of mind. And this is really looking at the kind of impermanence of mind. It doesn't remain for even a moment. It changes moment to moment to moment. Yet there is a continuity of that mind that isn't cut, a continuity that will pass into future lives and so forth. So here, understanding the nature of mind in terms of its impermanence. And then we get to the mindfulness of phenomena, both the sort of impure and purified sides of that.
lang tung gen ki chö la ma le pa do tramba ni sha sha da to ko me re do ta tong ba ni ya bo kom to bu yo na lo le chü to bu yo na ji ba ji ge me na ne te tong ba ni ko me te tramba ni sha ti she do ta da de ga so tong ba ni she she yo da tian de ta chi dang tong ba ni ko ya bo chi yo na en do zo re re she de ya bo chi ha ko to bu ra ro te de ti ji ko de re chi to de she na bu ji re 동반이 시도 가르치고 있으네. 단단 알아줘기로 아samble 나라인데 소소가 삼데 나데 라와데 제가 삼로 거기도 등에 소고래서 소고 봐셔도 등에 셈데 내 초아래서 저 삼로래서 딜레 로스라서 단데 나지 요바 삼로 거기도 풍불에 tension 베타스네 되거라. 소다 소라단 두시단 두지 나버셰바 셈도 파샤네 나데 테조 강갈 왕주 쟁게르치 왕 쟁게르치 왜 삼로를 거기도 티요 말에서라 나 랑원에요 말 나랑 삼부도 나랑게 요 삼부도 나랑게 요 삼부도 나랑원에 랑원에서도 랑원에 랑신기 축톱도 줘봐 축톱봐 딱 써봐 째서봐 그렇지 랑축토바 코라 축통게 대도 나 가려 봐서 어디 인사라 다르지는 어디 다르다서 그 다인다인 들으신 저거 조사를 지여 봐시 와 다네지 차베 여러진에 이 동안 이 랑원에 이 동안 다 지여 봐서지 이 고난원에 저 딱제 전에 라에 여버지 가그래서 들에서 딱 써봐 째서 버지 진짜 삼로 거기도 안 가라 이동아이나도 이동아이나도 트라이나도 니나도 배우도 캄버리지나도 배우도 저 삼로 거기도 저 랑원에 두바시도 캄바 코랑원에 가 캄바에 추투 그러지 동원에 전에 캄바에 찍바다 토다 자르자르 롱바강여라 저저 참마라 대신 될내내 대 캄바에 쳐지는 바 레파 다샤르 마다지게 디나네 찍데레세 찍투제 캄바에 버지 요마로 tingwa changma chibara namru rache da computer da tina chala kaza yu chichira ta de namru res de papa res thonsana pine namru do se namru swata agirwa ta chilo papa de re de yo mara nalo to bajne kon namru enge shenda se ke yo mara chig zo se ke yo mara teso changma ge lega re chide ta namru do te to phirso se 남도 땅에 가서 요래 때서 강가게 내가 전에는 시대 단 남도 필수 남도 대서 로에 왕게 빠따게 도와 차셔로 이제 코나 마무여라 잘라다면 마무여라 때서 강에로 아주 로를 차네 어디 지지 강바데스 토거를 통한다 개군을 통한다 바주르지는 거를 통해서 어디 랑거를 시다그라 고장장랑 건데 말아 차셔럽지 망보 초대가를 뭐도 뭐 간가 로봇이 매그게 고랑 장장게 지 레통게시 요 말에 로봇 차셔 망보 초내네 레레 맹레를 따기어라 곱다트에 떠달이야 데메레 디타레 디팔라레 디시지멘 따기도 자 소설 삼을탄데 다 매번 동반에서 담보 소설 삼을탄 고대요라 디나시 최 강가 찍버려서 찍을 거라 뭐라나 삼마 찍버라 소소 소보치 요래 셈요래 초라도 신 마모도 소보에 르세제 차자 레부치 요 말에 강바 라바 차셰 나게 나자 셈다 미다 나와다 베 르스데 강가 차자 레부치 레세고 요라 딜르레세 찔르 조조에서 요 말에 네 데데스 라바 저시 투사제 라바 주체나 라바도 뜻이 말아 이나 코란 데데 고쳐도래 뜻이 투사 라바 나사가 나데 예세 라바 나르바 다 로가지는 다 나고 말아 라바 나르 고 나데는 고 나기어라 다 로가지는 다 나요 말아 고 나데래 다 나서고도 될 때는 딱 와서 대참을 샤고래 타녀지 왕게 샤바서라 차세 맨라 카세 지역에 될 안에 명지 따는 대왕가 파샤와서래 데 원래 맛이 온거라 나라도 빼나 이 고랑원에 이 동아지 가외 유지여나 그 개부를 집어서 고라대에서 포장도도 빼치고요 링거도 야고에 저 남지도 봐 고라를 잡는 그 기부시다요라 대화 초루라 영어 초르라 다니 맞지 그 도에를 지치 중화제 야 개부 고사밤게를 집어서 전을 도에를 영어 쓰기도 하면서 지고 지금 샨다로보다 계신부 가셔 매버셔 저는 대판로데데 거기 동해라 시제토라 남주나시 대와 저거 말아 남주 예동하데 가셔서 가외 라문에 배 가왔던게 유지 삼기도 다 뒤도 삼기면도 하고 랑신지 연하 거기 다 남주나시 레데라고 라문에 가왔던 게 지구라 예동하시 토라 다 예동하 동말고 동해라 시제를 선조에 조하기 실통도 저한테 그 소소 샘기 봐 따당실 캐르도 소소 샘기 봐 따당실 캐르고 뭐도 이 고난이나 이동화데 거두이나 이동화라 통고라 이동명화데 유랑원에나 이동명화 통고라 대통금에도 저 차세질 때네 뭐고 강가 차세 망보요래 대소레레레 내가 지도네 되게 내가 지게 따고요래 지나라 나 상가라서 대삼기 말아 나서 나랑 그 삼부치 샨다주에는 뭐도 집이요 말아 다다치 요고도 삼겨와라 어때요 말해서 동반이래서 샨다 동반이를 타라만 뭐야 샨다 마삼나 계산보다 소소 소보 제 소소 말아 소소 소보를 넣어서 같이 요 말아 소소 소보 파샤는 미래기 말아 미 소보면 미래로지 말아 내 소소 소보데 미 말에 가 말에 야 소보 마이게 배 로서 같이 양 로가지 뭐 세븐나신 이유나 대요 말아 내 소보 나도 다나 소보도 다로 다 대세디 말아 소보 나기 하래세 공부자기 하래 다 공부자기 말세 세수를 쳐로 저 소보 풍불에 대신에 다 매버도 삼을 코트나 또 패기도 다 동반예수도 진짜질을 쓰기 위해서 삼로 땅서지여나 되게 딱딱고 참모인 그에게요 말에 아 동반예수 진짜질 쓰기 위해서 소소 콘도를 싫어서나 아 알레치서 제도 동반이 공부 삼을 패터요 말에 아유 싫어 내셔서 너자 랑와서 가서 지요 삼겨라 대체 어떤데 야 되게 대체 소샤나네 때 강가를 르다네 르제네 찍버레 삼체 돈다 소소 따제지데 소소 셀다 나 가봐도세 이마테 도나치 여기래 미텐데 지도are 코치 코나 도무를 지도바지 야도데 라소래 아니 코페 페셔버체 주세 야 제가 두요래 내 산제 좀 되는데 또 페베 카두케래 내 거트네 아텐데서 로송에서 나한테 제기했어. 걔랑 밑에 주샤는 걔랑 담보 걔랑 제 용해서래. 가서는 하트 거의 암천대서 가르세. 걔랑 가와도 제 용해서래. 그 시럽 세부이지라 어머니 뒤고 주스도 와서 나한테 가르치래서 동반이 그 삼로코를 기시하시고도 어디인데 가서래. 소소소고 차세 가양가 말해서 강디네 저 지주 받아야 섬을 당겨 와라 차셔레레레 루바다 로아다 침바다 제제자 말했어. 다나 대절에 배 로스 나지 뭐 세븐나시야 로가지 버려서 대요 말아. 디나네 지금 나리에서 대요 말아. 약간 가래. 대달 때에 딱 봤삼지. 로왕게 봐 샤바 참. 지내기 타녀제 왕게샤. 락바 나나 지제 락베 지제나 예수도 공부제 누구네 다 누구도 소태 샤고 와라. 대삼지 자시 샤고도. 자와 쟁쟁 뭐래 집히게 제가 신인 줄 알면도 와. 데리에서 찍게면도 와. 이나 대조를 내가 레레레게 내가 제베데 그 자와 제베 샤고도 와. 때네 딱 봤으면 자시로 와서. 땡제 레버를 좀 와서. 산제 좀 된데 소인데 개 시슈데 땡제 쏜 거라. 최강가 교단 게임 마보라 때네는 그 소셔요래 죠마. 근데 라게 뭐데 랑게 차셔 마보지네 대조 내가 전에네 텔레 때네 봤다고 삼 샤워레스. 때네 딱 봐. 땡제 레버를 좀 와. 마보지 소때 대단 렐데네 찍샤고를 봐도 대단히 찍 주주서지 오마로. 디나시 나가서 가서 콘도시다 세드다로 아니 배 동해를 시즌겨도 배 시부지 진짜 상탄데 동반에 상탄한테 뱅기 와라 아 다들 다르지네 배 시부지 다두자 통고네 동반에 상탄에 소소를 봤다고 요래 삼나 다 멤버 차그래 유랑훈에 다를 삼겨라 그 소소를 딱딱시래 삼 근데 그 개발을 제대로 뺄래를 시작했는데 그 막아 제공하는 남자다 그 가을님만 다시 이동하와 통구마라 저 소소생비 삼을 땅단도 또배 다삼세 쇼탐제 때네 딱 봐서 다시다 차셔라 때네 아니 데데레 멘타 때저 내가 제가 샤오라 때네 딱 봐서 때제 레버리 좋아 차셔라 때제 레버리 좋아 교단 깨라 때제 레버리 좋아 뭐다 진료스를 삼을 땅에 또 스펙이지라 야 기초다 뒤뒤 소샤를 당에 마부 거리 캠랍 그래 거리 잡고요 말이야 야 뒤손에 안 그래
So here we're going to try to give Geshe-la sometimes goes a little long. So all of this, these four mindfulnesses, as they are explained here in this 9th chapter, are in the context of explaining emptiness, looking at our feelings and our body and our mind and seeing that these are all empty. So if we get to, until we get to the point where we have an understanding of emptiness, we can contemplate them in other ways, like the body being unclean and the feelings being changeable and so forth. But we can also use these as a point of contemplation for emptiness. And really, when we think about emptiness here, to just give an overview of what do we mean by emptiness? In our mind, we have a sense of an I, right? There seems to be this like autonomous I that exists, like it's somehow separate from our other aggregates, as if we could say like, okay, that's my body, that's my mind, those are my feelings, my discriminations, karmic formations, and there would be this like I that would be the controller, the emboss that is sort of in charge of the various aggregates, that exists in and of itself, that exists from its own side, that is like able to bear scrutiny or bear analysis, as if there were something that we could point to and say, oh yeah, this is it. I can point to, this is the I. Like when we search, we can't find such a thing, whether it is we're thinking like, oh, this is my enemy. Well, if we actually try to look, well, where is that enemy? Can you point to them? Or something that is unpleasant or that is pleasant? They seem to exist like in and of themselves, objectively from their own side. But when we investigate and analyze, we can see that all things don't exist in that way. This applies to all phenomena. Like we can think about a computer or a plane or a house, that they are merely designated on a collection of parts. Like say you see the external body of a plane going by and you say, oh yeah, there's a plane, I see this plane flying. Well, is that external part actually the plane? No, the plane is something that is designated upon a collection of parts, then various activities that are happening. And so all of these things are merely posited by mind. It is on the basis of having something arise into our mind, and then we say, oh, this is this. So if like, for example, we have our hand hurts, then we say, oh, I'm sick. if it were actually the case that there were this I that were somehow separate and apart from those aggregates that were the controller, we wouldn't logically be able to say that, because when the hand is hurting, it's not the I couldn't be the one hurting and so forth. So it is on the basis of a collection of parts and having something appear to mind. Like we might see the head of a bull and we say over there, oh, there's a bull. Well, the head of a bull isn't a bull, but we can logically say that based upon that is something that is conceptually designated by mind. So here it's the same too when we come to like analyze our body. It seems like our body is the single solid whole, like one thing. But when we actually begin looking, we can't find something within the body that we can point to that is the body, all the way from the soles of our feet to the top of our head. There's no way that we can find that. And like other expressions, like for example, we might say, oh, I met Tashi, I shook his hand, you know. We didn't actually, like, is Tashi his hand? How was that meeting possible? But rather, it is on the collection of parts that we designate, oh, this is something, this is that. So we can see, like, that things are also changeable too. That when it comes to how we look at things, the way that we project matters. So, for example, someone might be a king and enjoy like very opulent palace and beautiful gardens and so forth, but their situation can change, and all of a sudden, all of those things look very negative, and they aren't what we thought they were. If phenomena existed from their own side in this way that was like objective, that they were able to bear scrutiny, that we could point at them and say, yes, this is it, then we can't, there wouldn't be any variability. It would have to be that that thing is pleasant or this thing is unpleasant and appears as that to anyone who perceives it. But that isn't the case. And so here we have this thought that we exist in and of ourselves, that we have this kind of objective existence. We think that like I could find just if like that there is something that we could somehow point to, but we aren't like a person, we aren't our body, for example, but yet we can't posit a human being, a person, apart from the body. And the way that we, when we say, like, for example, oh, I'm walking, I'm talking, I'm eating, these are things where if we actually try to scrutinize and find that I, or find even that action, there's no way that we can find them. This is something that is designated upon a collection of causes and conditions, a collection of parts, and is dependent upon that designated basis and the designating mind. So here, it doesn't need to be the most subtle level of emptiness for us to benefit from some kind of an understanding of this. Like when we use this kind of, and usually we begin with ourselves and we apply that same reasoning to all other phenomena. But if we really look for like, where am I? Where is it that I can point to and say, this is the I? When we look for ourselves, we can't find some I that is somehow totally separate and apart from the aggregates, but nor can we find that there's anything that is within the aggregates that we can point to and say, yes, that is the I. But rather, we would have to say that this is merely posited by the force of convention. This is something that is designated by thought, by name, but yet, even within that, it is able to function. That is actually how it is able to function. So here, whatever is dependently designated, that is said to be empty, and that is that which is dependently originated or dependently designated. That is what is functional. We can only speak of things having functionality within that kind of context of phenomena being merely nominally existent or merely dependently designated. And so here, in those times where, say, we are really angry or we are experiencing really intense suffering or something, to think, okay, where is that anger? Where is that person? Like, say it's a person that you are angry with. Where is that person? Where is that feeling? Where is that suffering? This is something that the contemplation of emptiness can kind of dissipate that intense affliction or the suffering that we are experiencing. We might have this sense of like, that person is my enemy. They're really there. I can tell, I could point to them as my enemy. But when we begin to investigate and analyze and we find there's nothing there, all of a sudden we're no longer sort of angry with that person. We don't see the person that we are angry with. Now, so here, when it comes to our way of thinking about phenomena, we have to recognize that they don't exist in the way that they appear to us, but rather phenomena are merely designated upon a basis that is a collection of various causes and conditions, a collection of various parts. And earlier, Geshe-la had said that there was a story about during the time of the Buddha where someone had lost, I believe it was some kind of an animal, and they're running down the road trying to find this thing. And the Buddha sort of stops, recognizing that this person has a level of understanding where they could get a little bit of emptiness, said, well, have you thought about where are you right now? And this person then sort of had to stop and think, well, where actually am I? Where is this I that I feel that is there? And so here, when it comes to what we are discussing in terms of these four applications of mindfulness, again, there's a level that is not emptiness that we contemplate. But when we are thinking about emptiness, it is really this way in which phenomena lack that kind of objective, inherent existence from their own side. Although they appear as though they have that, they don't actually have that. They don't have that sort of existence in and of their own right, from their own side, as if there was something that we could point to and find, but rather they are merely dependently designated. There is a name or a thought, a label that we apply to a particular basis of designation, which is itself a collection of parts. And if we were to take that basis of designation and try to find that itself, we couldn't as well, because it's, again, designated.
Dewa Rangshiji Matuba Shigdwa, Tunge Rangshiji Matuba Tata Shestare, Dewa Rangshiji Matubas. Oh, take on this dosana. Tena se Yange Tungsola Sidwa, Dewa de Soa Dewa de Siwara. Chita Dewa Tungesana, Susu Lusimla Pembe Suji Yute Yonsona Dewa Siwara. Suinanda, Tayana, Tina, Roina, Rexana, Karina, Tiletana, Social Lusimia, Pembetsuji, Yute, Yonsona, Sorsona, Tiletsoa, Deasagora. It a Yude tone to Social Lusimla, never Suji. Penny Yude Yonsona, Soa Dungesagora, Dugutsoda. Penny Mandreve Suji, Kevar Mavada, Dawasi Yude Sorsona, Soa Danim Sigra. Ngarazu Mig. Tanandra, Amdo Tatanandra, Kalasanandra, Kimandam Nandra, Kanga, Tsoyora, Kashel Tsoa Dewa, Kashel Tsoa Dunge, Kashel Tsoa Tanyum Sigra. You see la Pembetsuji, you did Sorsona, Tsoa Dewa. Darachine, Ketcha Nyambo Shesona, Tsoa Dewa and Wura. Ketcha similar Mabachi Shesona, Tsoa Dunge and Wura. Tawas Ketcha Shene, Keva Mendu, Dewa Mendu Tome, Tsoa Tanyum Sigra. Oh, Tindu. That's why Deva said, Rangshinji Tuba Yo Mareswara. Rangshinji Tumna Kora Deva Rangune, but Tavaris, Deva Rangi Tego Yora. Teve you there, Rangshinji Teve you in a Kotavaris, Teve you Tego Yora. Titegama, Rangshinji Tegama. Chumare. Karesnet Koran Chashet, or Nipa, Chunani, Deva Tungi Swati Unguramato. You don't say they could pay Chashet and Social Tadangwage. Yido Oma Yungura. Penangobachi in a Kashek Yidoma Tungure, Kashek Yidumema Tungure, Kashek Parma Tungura. Sako Lola Rashida Legdoa. Oh, King did it. Then a Yange Tonso Lase, Dewa Rangshinji Trubachi Yona Segura, and then Yange Pena Michiria Sosoge. Pundachi Yarwa, Pamadachi, Tone, the Kotubucho, and Capchina. Yange Tonera, Yange Shadachi Capchina. And it got saw Deva de Rangshinji Yonasa, 10 hours. Saw Deva Rangshinji Yonasa. Yange Tonsola, Rangi Pushi was okay. Amachilla Pupe, Ketchum Bushivichi, Titronsonande, some day on Gura. Yange Tondi Ora, Tunge Tondi Oraco, Tunge Yande Ora. Oh, this way. Dewa Rangshinji Yona Yange Tonsola and a Shimso de Kamichi. Taco Pushini and a Tungeche de Ora, Tela Kalala, so Washing Bushiboche, tradition traje shivuchi chebe yana ko tewa tsurga mare chara karshan me tsora tate ko tewe kyu namyu kala tinde trechi de ko kabu che ya wuchi tewe kone longche ge wara tate de ko tewa tsurga mare ke kare chara ta tewa rangshin ki yo na tewe kyu de dagara yo wara namyu na shi wara ne tege tewe kyu rangune tewe kyu che wara che togu yo mara ko tewa nyong togu yo mara te karese tewa rangshingi yo na tewa de tewe kyu de rangshingi tewe kyu ina rangshingi yidongwa ina tewa tegura te ma sa ko samlu na ti ko samlu tang tang kheba du do tene ta hwa lo hwa ta tang ko samlu tang tang ko kheba du sa ko tungye nya de za ti ko tewa churgu mara churgu yo mara te se tena nyangye tong so la shimso chi de gameche kala shimbu shebu dra jebuchi chiwina namju ko kabuche sagwer tidi ko kabu meyo arese tewa rangshingi yeba yina kala yabu ti shabati rangshingi tewe ju yina rangune tewe ju yina ku kadine tewe ju tewa tegura ti chigme doa sigwara tena nyange dongso la shimso chi de gameche o kala shimbu shebu chonso se ko kabu tone ro nyongche ne kala sayate yungume doa se tewa rangshingi tewe gyu ina tanda tewe gyu chegoro namgyu de chigbarwa ti meche kare ko samlu tantang le rale son tokbe wangi pa shagi doa desoro tongso la shimso chi de gameji shimbu tang ane che kabu tang soa tewa nyoya de karchen nyonggu yo ma re sigwara tewa rangshingi ina nyonggu re sigwara ti tuyo nyonggu re sigwara rangshingi mea ne tenchi rebar juwa soza ko tange ulo tila tenne shindel ne ya ko ti nyamu tila kabu yungu yo mara tenchi rebar soza ko chi lo cho ne taltang li keban dugu wara o ti indi ko rangwe ne rangshingi yo mara lo tang chashe ke chugu yo wara so chuma chu sogu yo wara yidongwa sogu yo wara tanda ko seba ti me zani ti yungu yo marwa tena nyange dongso la shimso chi de kame che se ti tiwa tere ta tewa rangshin yu se di tena peche na tinte mambo yunga te chukta mawa nangpa la chukta mawa ngo mawa ta ngo tindu mawa ta ngo rangshin ji chuba rangune chuba kelenge ta melenge nyi yora uma ba tu kelenge marwa tongpa nyi kelenge yora konzo lagu yora terang tewa gyute tang tewa rangshingi yosigdo as ti yoba ina ane nyange ki pushiwa soji nyange yunge metilya namju kabu chisa ke kala traki yabu de te shana ko kabu karchan mayon re sikore o ter kame chis ta ko tso le jamnerwa top dan dembe sinen chire kete nyo ma ino sa o tewa yota yore de tume de shukchida chune ti sigi nene tewa nyungu yo ma re chere tewa tewa nyungu ro ma do tewa ma nyungu tewa chi kade yungu ma re sigora top dan dembe sinen chere kede nyo ma ino shena se o ti ji lapsana tene o de yungu ra ti landila ya.
So here we are actually going to be picking up from the second half of verse 88 in the Tibetan. This is on 524. And here this reads, so we had gone through kind of refuting the inherent existence of suffering, and now we turn to refuting the inherent existence of happiness. So here it reads, if happiness truly exists, why do savory things and so on not brighten up the pain of grief and so on? So here, when we think about experience, our feelings of happiness or suffering or kind of neutral feelings, this is really based upon whether it feels like something is beneficial to us or something is harmful to us. If something seems as though it's beneficial, as though it's good for us, it brings a kind of happy feeling. Otherwise, it brings a suffering feeling, or if there's kind of a neutral feeling as well. That's neither happiness nor suffering. But here, when it comes to our experiences of suffering or of happiness, this is really based upon, again, dependent designation, as in it is very much based upon designating on a collection of various parts. So our way of thinking is very important. It is dependent upon the mind. So if, for example, someone, a mother or a father, has lost a child and they are in this kind of grief of suffering, if their child has died, no matter whether you put really delicious food in front of them or give them all sorts of things that would normally be pleasurable, they don't feel happiness from that, right? And so if it were the case that those objects, like say delicious food, were inherently the source of happiness, then it should be the case that even if you were to give that to a grieving person, it would still bring happiness because that's somehow inherent in the object. But rather than that, we can see that this is dependent upon our own way of thinking. When someone is overcome by grief, is in kind of the throes of that despondency, it doesn't matter what you put in front of them, they're not going to experience happiness. So here, again, it is dependent on our way of thinking, dependently designated based upon various circumstances. So it is us who makes something pleasant or who makes it unpleasant. It doesn't exist inherently in and of itself. And so here within the Buddhist tenet schools, the various philosophical schools, there are those that we could call realists and those who are not, which includes the Madhyamakas, who assert emptiness. So here, if there were kind of a natural inherent existence to phenomena, including our feelings, then it would have to be that they are unchangeable. Or if it were the case that those inhered in the objects themselves, like the objects of our senses, various pleasurable objects of our sight and sound and taste and touch and so forth, then whenever we encountered them, they would have to bring us pleasure. They would have to give us happiness. But we can see that, as in the case of someone who is overcome by grief, then the sort of question is posed, well, if happiness truly exists, why do savory things and so on not brighten up the pain of grief? And so here, the response then comes to that, well, you might say that such pleasure is not experienced due to its being overridden by intense suffering. But here the question then becomes, well, how then can something that is not experienced be a feeling? If something is a feeling, it must be experienced. So for us to talk about the experience of something in the absence of feeling is illogical. There's no way that that can be. So here, if it is the case, again, that someone asserts the inherent existence of suffering and happiness, then not only would those be unchangeable, but the sources, the kind of sense pleasures or sense objects that give rise to those would have to always do so. And we can see from experience that that is not the case.
Cho nên ở đây đứng theo quan điểm của Trung Quán Ứng Thành Phái mà nói rằng cái lạc thọ đó nó không có tự tính, khổ thọ cũng không có tự tính. Nhưng mà những người họ cho rằng có tự tính thì họ trả lời rằng tại vì lạc thọ nếu mà nó có tự tính thì tại sao, thì họ giải thích rằng là tại vì nó có cảm thọ lạc, nhưng mà lúc đó mình đang đau khổ, nó chiếm ưu thế, cho nên mình không cảm nhận được cái lạc thọ. Thì ở đây nói điều như vậy thì sẽ không có hợp lý. Tại vì những cái điều gì mình chưa cảm nhận được, những cái cảm thọ lạc mình chưa cảm nhận được cảm thọ lạc, thì làm sao gọi là cảm thọ?
다들 소스티체 다들 오데 가시 냠요 다니미 대화 가서래 동해대 대화 제베 주대 대화 찍으래 대화 참모치 찍으래서 듣게나 대 냠수 용토요 말했으라라 냠수 용 많이 쓰나 야 걔도 대화 용 많이 넣으시나서 다들 내겨라 강시 냠뇨 땅이 미 대나 지더라 대나 초아 지더라 초아이 참을 저 대화 참을지 요아를 깨 요아래서 이나 그 동해들 세계는 용도고요 말해셔라 대화에는 대화 용고로 와셔라 대화들 소속의 대화 초내니 대화 샤워르면서 대화 맞송게서 대화 용 말아 너티 시거라 강시 냠뇨 땅이 메세 강사 코랑 줄에 대화 참을 깨네 대에는 소소 냠수 마녀나니 대화를 말해야 셔라 같이 냠뇨 당님에 대내 소화 지더리 소화 대화 지더리인데 많이 받다 그 소화 대화 강사들 대행호라는 라게 루스를 펜베스지 마녀에 칠수기 와라 야 되지라나 이거도
So here, then, as it continues, again, this is the first half of, or sorry, yes, verse 89. So again, one might say, well, in that situation, like where someone is overcome by grief and you are given delicious food, well, there is happiness, but it's just a feeling of happiness that is so subtle that it's basically not experienced. So you may say, this is verse 89, you may say such pleasure is not experienced due to its being overridden by such intense suffering. Well, how then can something that is not experienced be a feeling? So here, if in response they want to say, well, there is some joy, but it's not actually experienced, it's too subtle. Well, the nature of feeling is to be experienced, so that doesn't make sense.
동해 참문이도 요새 대체 동해 참무지 요래서 봤어 동해 참문이도 요 네라고 세미 남세 지가시도서나 가시 냠소녀에 땅이 많이 받을 소아를 말해셔라 많이 받아 냠소 마녀에 실시와라 대신도 대 먹어 주셔 대 먹어 주 개대 대화 똥대 개베스다 대화 또 전부 개베스에서 대화 똥대 개베스 서로 동해 참문이도 예 봐서 대화 똥대 개베스에서라 소아 동해 참문이도 여봐 동해 참무지도 요아래서 오라 요나야 참무 여봐 요에 종세자 동해 참무지 용거래 동해 천주지도 용거래 동해 지에 많이 봐 말에 용거 요서 나서 오라 그 참무 요나서라 동해 요나 아니 동해 참무니도 요서 참무 요아래 동해 참무지 용거래서 나서 오라 대 라바 세메 남세 아니 대화 되게 와 대화 전부 되게 동해 참부대 동해 라바데 바세어 말베 매버서 말베셔라 대화 숙침부 기도서 동해데 바시기네 매버서 거래 동해 기도 대화데 바 매버서 거래서 시기네 라바데 바세어 있어서 하더니 세어 말 매버서 매도 참부대도 참부대 동해를 와서 거라 대 라바 세메 남데 샤워를 도셔라. 그래서네 전에 tel에 셴가 좀 셴나 전에 tel에 셴가 좀 쓰도 전에 tel에 개대 대화 동대 집에서 서로 동행에도 중세자 마녀와 마인스 중세 용거래서나 소아 동해 참모 여나 대화 동대 동해 참모 지와를 참모 용거래 지어라 대나니 대화 동대 되게 동해대 매버서 마송하서 거라 전에 치대 동대 용어죠 근데 대화 동대 용어에 대화 되게 동해대 매버서 좀 버려서 데르모도 참모도 대대도 와서 거라 대화 동대 동해대 라고 세와 메남데서 세와 메남데 안에 임바라 데베서 되게 지대 파셀고 야라 오늘 동해 참모되네 대화 참모되네 셰 동해 참모되네 대화 참모되네 셰가 셰서 가와 참모네 다들 가와 참모지 인선에 되게 돼서 에스도 대신 안에 단디 봐 가보지기도 대화 참모니나 네 대화 연구를 동해대 대화 차로라 동해 참모 되게 대화 충족지 저지에서 대화 숙제다라 전시가라 얘나니 대 동해 참모이나 대 동해를 그래 와서 대화 참모니 대화 차와니 대체니 내 말대로 대화 참모대 대회체니 시라 대화 연구로 와서 이 동해 되게 대화 간거 살면 도와 매로 쓰면 도와시거라 만대베 참모이나 대화 연구에서 대화 참모이나 대화 연구를 동해 되게 대화 전부 되게 동해 대 살면 도와서 동해 참모 대도 동해 참모대 동해를 와서기도 야 티스나 다 롭스로 셀렉션 되고 가버려
Yeah, so this is a little bit difficult to explain, but again, when we say that feeling is by definition the nature of experience, you might say that, well, there is a kind of subtle unhappiness. So it isn't the case that when we have great joy or great pleasure, that it completely removes all unhappiness, even the subtle. But like that subtle sort of discontent or unhappiness that remains, you've removed the sort of coarse, gross unhappiness, and there's really just a subtle level of unpleasantness that remains. Well, and then you were saying, like, again, we can't have two things that are in contradiction at the same time, being experiencing pleasure and experiencing pain at the same time. So that then subtle unhappiness would have to be another pleasure. If that were the case, then even that subtle satisfaction or dissatisfaction would be joy. So here, again, it basically is, they are trying to argue that by removing the sort of more gross forms of our unhappiness or our suffering, that maybe only a subtle form of that remains. Well, if a subtle form remains, and when you are experiencing, say, great joy, then it would have to be the case that that would be in the nature of pleasure. Like, we can't experience two sort of contradictory things. So again, they're saying that there's not a complete destruction. It's not like through our joy we completely eliminate our unhappiness, but it goes into sort of like a latent or very subtle state. However, we would have to say that since that subtle form of pleasure is a type of happiness, it can't be classified as suffering now. So even that sort of subtle pleasure that one might experience is a form of pleasure. So again, trying to assert that somehow the kind of gross pleasure, when we experience really intense pleasure, that removes only the gross kind of suffering, but that a subtle suffering remains, that too is not really logical to assert, because whatever remains has to be sort of in the nature of that pleasurable feeling that dominates. Again, this is something that is quite difficult to understand, so we're giving kind of a bit of an overview of this, and that is, again, these are quite difficult to get through.
Là cảm nhận thuộc loại vui nhỏ, thì lúc đó cái vui nhỏ đó, cái khổ vi tế đó nó trở thành cảm thọ lạc, thì đâu còn gọi là khổ nữa.
Có đề sự đó, kể từ cái gì chế về nó sẽ, tung hệ chế về mình sẽ, để vào trong bộ chế độ sao, tung hệ cái gì chung rồi, tung hệ cái gì chế độ tung hệ chế vào mà rồi sẽ ra, kể từ cái sự kể từ cái gì chế về nó, tung hệ cái gì, để vào chế về nó sẽ gọi ra, tung hệ chế về mình này thì tung hệ chế thuộc vào mà rồi, tung hệ cái gì để vào súc chế bị chế chế rồi, nó này sẽ gọi ra. 네, 소화도가 무엇이니? 근데 소화도 가서라. 소화도가 무엇이니? 세자주가. 걔네 다 소화 대화 동에서 되고 소소 떡배왕게 샤과 좀 임바. 떡배왕바 신배왕게 샤고고 도와서라. 소화를 떡바. 무엇이니? 떡배왕바 신배왕게 유디 샤고 도와서. 그래서는 대외 교인아야 대외 규칙이 그버리 대외 규칙 그버리 동해의 규칙이 도와서 대체에 소소 또 배운 게 샤과에 도와서 되도서 걔들 개인 제배나 동해 제바 미나니 소아 똑방을 신이 인시자가 주면은 소아 디두세데 똑배왕게 샤과 좀 인시 주가 미남들 주기도 하세 똑배 따서니 뭐 주기도 하세거라 가서 대회 주를 찌게 거기 대화께 거기 동해지기도 하세 계속하고 똑배왕게 샤과래도 하세 미남들 예노스 똑배왕게 샤과래도 하세 똑배왕게 샤과에는 유랑원에 주고 말어 하세거라 야 되게 럽스럽스
So then turning to verse 91, this reads that if you hold that suffering is not produced in the face of incompatible conditions, does this not imply that a feeling is a conceptual designation? So here, again, when we hold that suffering doesn't come about in certain conditions, like say when we are overcome with great joy, or the opposite, that joy won't arise when we're overcome with great suffering, then does this not imply that this thing that we call a feeling is conceptually designated? As in, these are merely designated. There isn't any sort of inherently existing happiness or pleasure, or inherently existing unhappiness or displeasure, but rather these come about due to various causes and conditions and are something that is conceptually designated. So this really implies that sometimes something can act as a source of happiness, sometimes of suffering, but it's merely designated by thought.
never tamba. That's why they were to make a inaya. Tokbe wangi shakwa sonza. And it's why Timber Meba, Rangwin maybe Najola comregres, Najor Tombani comregres, the Shekwa, comrepanes. Tini Chena de ne Yembo Namju comjades or Shichik, Tele Shichik, Titu Niga Chik to us, Tina, Tokbe wangi shakwa in Batechena. Tene Yembo Namju decom dese. Tungeti Kasore, Tunget Tembarjembe, Yembo, number Chuba, Tombani, Combelote, Nature de Comregres, Rangone Chuba, Tomba Comregres, Caresna, Namda Shile, Chunwaye, Samde Namjubasa, Tashi Chebe Kone Tungera Shijimatuba Koya, Comia, Roa, Yahatene, Tashi Chebe Kone Tungera Shimaba Comne, and Tele Semchich Neve Kone, Tungera Shimaba Comia. O te combate, and Najoba Namji, Tombani, things you combe, says the lieutenant Tombani, combination the Conde Condo Pevan, with Esigora. To that taxi chene, Tombani Comechi, Hatonra. And she Tombani taxi chene, Tombani combat, Shine, and a partner, Comechi, or the combate. Someday Najoba, Tombani combination. Seres, Kone Kondo Pele Cures,
Câu kệ số 92.
So then in the next verse, we have, therefore, this analysis is cultivated as an antidote for that false conception of intrinsic existence. The meditative absorption that arises from the field of discriminative investigation is the food of the contemplative. So here, this investigation and analysis is the antidote for our false conception of intrinsic existence. And so here, that kind of investigation and analysis, as well as the kind of single-pointed focus then upon the meaning that one has realized, act as like a sort of food for the contemplative or the yogi. It is on this basis that they will increase and develop their sort of concentration and wisdom more and more to their culmination. So here it is in this way that both this analysis, this kind of wisdom side, as well as the kind of meditative equipoise, placing the mind single-pointedly on that and developing the meditative absorption that arises from that field of discriminative investigation. This, yes, is the food of the contemplative.
텔레전에 미게 넘버십 나와 넘버십 네 넘버십 기기와라 뒤에다 주도서 라문에 주고 말해서 가르치고 그래서 담보들이야 네 왕도 tre바랑 신지 주바가와 왕보선에 메와를 지러와 아니 수르와 유디 수르와 수다 메와니부데 tre바 tre네는 남시 깨보라 수다 메와니 tre세야 돼 독배왕의 샤바상을 마도 수다 메와니부데 tre바 라문에 주바요 말해서 뒷가기도 수다 메와니 tre바 라문에 매 자다 나외 뭐 tre바랑 오네매 지다 로다 렉셔다 류아스테 tre바랑 시기 매버드 시에도 야 되질라나
So, then we have next what is an investigation or sort of a refutation of the cause as being inherently existent. So here, this gets into when we have like an object, our sense power and the sense consciousnesses, that none of those exist from their own side. So from the coming together of our consciousness, the sense power, and an object, there is perception that arises. We see various objects. We are able to perceive them, but it's not as though somehow the object of our senses exists in and of itself from its own side, or that the sense power exists in and of itself from its own side, nor the consciousness of that. But rather, when they come together, they give rise to perception. However, even that perception, the meeting of our sense power with its object is not inherently established. So this will be the verses beginning with 93 will be sort of refuting the idea of some sort of inherently existent cause, particularly in the production of our perception of objects, having an object and a sense power and that sense consciousness being able to perceive them. None of these exist from their own side.
Cái nhận thức của lỗ tai và mũi nó tiếp xúc với mùi thì nó sinh ra là cái nhận thức của lỗ mũi. Cũng như vậy, từ xúc chạm thì thân nó tiếp xúc với đối tượng bên ngoài, nó xúc chạm cho nên nó sinh ra một cái nhận thức của thân. Nên cũng như mắt, tai, mũi, lưỡi, vậy lưỡi nó tiếp xúc với vị, nó sinh ra một cái nhận thức của lưỡi. Tất cả 6 căn tiếp xúc với 6 trần, nó sinh ra 6 thức đều là không có tự tính. Yeah, đã hết
So the
giờ.
time is up for today, so we will stop there and resume tomorrow.
Just do the Vietnamese dedication.
Nguyện đem không được cớ này hướng về khắp tất cả đệ tử và chúng sinh đều trọn thành Phật đạo.
Okay, so today we finish here, and tomorrow 7:30, and then we are off on Tuesday. We will have a class on Wednesday, Thursday off, and then Friday and Saturday at 7:30 to 9. It's in the 7? Did I send in 7? Okay. Then 7 to 9. Yeah, 2 hours, yes.
Richard, you said Friday and Saturday off? Yes.
Wednesday
Yes.
and Friday and Saturday.
Friday and Saturday. Yeah.
Yes.
Dạ bây giờ mình đứng lên lại tạ ơn thầy rồi mình đi. Sau khi mà ngài đi rồi á mình ai muốn nghe cái tiểu sử của sư cô, của Galarimiche và của ngài Paritta thì ở lại.